I'm seeing some new faces. I like it. Hey, Mike, what's going on? Guillermo. Awesome. Okay. So today we're going to talk about OKRs and KPIs. What should you be looking at and how should you be looking at them and what's important and some optimization tactics. Marcel is our thought leader, expert, the guy that we go to for margins, profitability, metrics. He understands it better than most. He works with digital agencies all day long. And he does have a product if you're interested and use Harvest. It's called Parakeeto. It does hours tracking and some really cool optimizations around Harvest hours tracking stuff. I'll let you do a better pitch for your product than that. But Marcel, please introduce yourself. And we've linked to Marcel's LinkedIn and then the website so you guys can check that out. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
All right. Yeah. Thanks, Alex. Always a pleasure to be here in the partner programs community. As Alex mentioned, I'm the agency profitability guy. All I care about, all our company exists to do is help agencies improve their profitability. And actually, we don't have a piece of software anymore. We are essentially, you can consider us the agency for agencies. It's meta. But if you're struggling to answer questions in your business, like, are we making money on projects and clients? Can we take on more work? Do we need to hire people and when? Are we performing well relative to other people? How did we perform on this particular project? How are we scoping things accurately? Can we be doing that with more data? If those are the kinds of things you're thinking about, they're keeping you up at night, then you should talk to us. Those are the things that we help agencies fix. No matter what tools they're using or where they are today, whether you're tracking time or not, whether you estimate stuff on a napkin or in the back of your head or on a spreadsheet, doesn't really matter where you're at. If you're struggling with those things, we can help. So yeah, as you mentioned, Alex, this is all I think about pretty much all day. If I'm not eating, sleeping, or watching The Office, I'm thinking about agency profitability. And I've been at it for 4 years now, straight, just focused on this problem and excited to dig in today and nerd out over some of this stuff.
Awesome. I like it. I haven't thought about The Office in a while. I need to go back and binge a couple seasons of that. Very cool. Very cool. Well, let's start where you want to start. So we've got a list of items that we want to check off in the list of topics here. All great stuff. This is a fairly open discussion as usual. If you haven't been to one of our workshops, we try to keep it fluid and open. We can go down different tangents for a little while if the group agrees that it's not just specific to one of you and it's something everybody wants to listen in on. And Marcel does this really cool drawing system that everybody asks, like, what's the product that you use? So you can probably just start mentioning that before you
Notability. We'll get that out of the way. Notability. It's an app on the iPad.
Awesome. Let's get going. How do I measure my agency's performance? How profitable should I be? What KPIs should I be looking at? How often should I be looking at them? What are the calculations and benchmarks? How do I set up my operations tooling to make reporting on these easy?
So there's a lot to unpack here. So I'm just going to start kind of hammering away at those questions, and I'm going to have the chat open here so I can see it. So as you're listening to this, for those of you that are here attending live, just hop in the chat if something comes up as we go along, so I can make sure I stop to dig into the nuances where necessary. And so we're just going to cut straight to we'll start with the flywheel, as this is kind of the first thing I want everyone to understand of how we think about agency profitability. And then we'll start digging into the details here. So our belief and our thesis at Parakeeto and how we like to serve our clients is by installing a critical feedback loop. Our thesis here is that every day, the natural activities that your agency is doing are creating data that should make your agency smarter and more scalable over time and should support conversations that are important for you to scale. And so there's 4 core tenets to that feedback loop, and it starts with estimation. And estimation really relates to client projects. And this is a very unsexy truth. But when it comes to operations in your agency, like once you've figured out how to get sales and how to create pipeline and all those things that there's tons of other people out there talking about, lots of people that are far more qualified than I am on that end of the business. Once you've figured that out, the next thing you have to figure out is how do we scale? How do we go from 5 people to 15 people to 50 people to 500 people? And you might be sitting here today thinking like, it is such a shit show with my small team of 5 people right now. I can't imagine 100xing the amount of people and 100xing the amount of work that we do without it all kind of falling apart. And the reason it probably feels that way is because this is not figured out. When you think about it, agency operations is the function of trying to predict the future of your agency so that you can plan people, you can plan cash flow, you can plan profitability, you can assign people to work, plan out projects, right? It's really all about allocating time and resources into the future. And all of those systems, all of those models are based on the assumptions we make about client work. If we're off by 20, 30, 40, 50% consistently on our estimation about client work, then all of our operation systems downstream are going to be 20, 30, 40, 50% inaccurate. And therefore, it's always going to feel like a shit show. So unfortunately, this is where it starts. It starts with estimation. Now, the good news is a lot of people are starting to lean in the direction of productized services. A lot of people are actually starting to decrease the complexity of estimation by actually not even doing the work themselves. They're just hiring another agency and making it their problem instead. White label services, freelance partners, etc. All of those are legitimate ways to decrease complexity and make estimation tighter, but it's important to understand that this is a foundational piece of agency operations. So without this, we don't really have anything to build on top of. From there, it's fairly straightforward. We make assumptions about client work, and then we want to measure actuals. What actually happened? So how much money did we spend? How many external expenses do we actually have? How much time did we actually spend? And the key here is making sure that we can reconcile these things against each other. The problem that we see 9 out of 10 times when we work with the client and go in and do an audit is on their estimate, things are structured in one way. So for example, we have a client, we have a project, we have a phase, and then within the phase, we have like design time, PM time, development time, analyst time, strategy time, whatever. And then we go into their time tracking report, and it's completely different. It's like we have a project, and then we've got like tasks and subtasks, and the tasks are called like a whole bunch of random things. There's 500 tasks in there. If I want to ask the simple question of, did we spend as much design time as we thought we were going to? I need to clean all that data up in order to get that answer. And because the friction's so high, that feedback loop just doesn't exist. It doesn't get referenced often. So you need to have a system in place where you can hold your estimate up to the actual data and very easily figure out if those two things matched up or not, so that you can then support conversations that make the agency better. So this takes us to reports and meetings. We want to establish a cadence around that so that we're sitting down regularly to talk about what did we think was going to happen, estimation, what actually happened, measure actuals, and from there, understand what changes do we need to make, process improvements. Because the reality is sometimes we estimate things inaccurately because we're bad at estimating, or we didn't have data, or we didn't ask the right questions to the client, or what have you. But sometimes we're bad at estimating because we just don't have a very clear process for how we do things. And so it's not happening consistently. And so sometimes that's the end that we need to close things from. But if we install this feedback loop where we're getting data, so everyone's clear on here's what actually happened, and here's where there's a disconnection between our assumptions and what actually happens. And then we have a discussion about how do we reconcile that, and we actually make changes to our process. And over time, what we're doing is we're creating a system that gets us predictable profit and allows us to scale. Because what we plan for when we sign on a new client, when we make a new sale, is much closer to what actually happens. Therefore, we can make projections into the future. We can predict when we're going to hire people. We can predict when a project's going to wrap up. We can predict how much profit we'll have left over after that's done. We can make investments. We can start to do all the things that need to be true for us to be scaling to hundreds of people, adding dozens of people a month to our team without running into all kinds of growth challenges. So that's kind of the baseline. So from there, I want to zoom out and I want to talk a little bit about these two things first and foremost, because that's where we specialize, is in getting the data so that you can actually have productive conversations and make productive changes on the back end here. So I'm just going to start with kind of the 4 key areas that you have to track and understand in order to measure the performance of your agency. So the 4 key areas are: number 1, earning efficiency. So what is earning efficiency? It's the question of how efficiently does my business earn its revenue? So this is a big idea. It's lost on some people, but if you think about it, the big difference between you and every other service company, whether you're selling websites, you're selling lawn care services, you're selling muffler repair, you're selling accounting or legal services, you're selling SEO, it doesn't really matter what the service is. If you're exchanging skilled labor in exchange for money, then you need to understand for every dollar of revenue that we make, what does it cost us to earn that revenue? How much time do we need to deploy against that? Who do we have to pay and deploy against that in order for the deliverable that we promise the client to get closer to being finished so that we can actually contractually consider that revenue hours. And every hour that we invest in a project has a real cost, whether we're paying somebody a salary or if we're paying somebody by the hour. So we need to understand what is the efficiency of the way that our business earns revenue. And we can do that in one of two ways. We can use gross margin, or as we like to call it, delivery margin, or we can use average billable rate. And we'll talk about those in a little bit more detail in a moment. The next thing that we need to understand is our utilization. All right. So what is utilization? Simply put, it's the measure of how much time are we paying for in a given period of time? How much time do we have access to on our team, based on who we hire, based on maybe our freelance bench, and how much of that time are we deploying towards things that earn us revenue? And so utilization is it's a simple metric. It's calculated by looking at your utilization rate, but we need to be paying attention to utilization, especially if we have a large internal team. The thing where this gets mucked up a lot is, we just did an audit for a client that's doing $8 million in revenue per year. And they came to us and said, yeah, we don't really have an internal team. We outsource all of our work to white label partners. But the reality was they had 25 people on their team still. They just weren't doing any of the SEO work in this case that the client was doing, but they still needed to be tracking utilization and earning efficiency because those people represented, over $1 million in payroll costs every year. So regardless of how your agency is structured, whether you're doing a lot of the work internally or you're doing it externally, there's still going to be a management cost internally that you need to be measuring against and looking at the efficiency of. So utilization is the second key component. The third is your financial metrics. So you want to make sure that on, a regular basis, whether that's monthly or quarterly, you can go into your accounting software and take a snapshot of what's actually going on. Earning efficiency and utilization are going to be these day-to-day, week-to-week metrics that you can look at to get a pulse on, are we directionally headed in the right place? But the source of truth for how much money came in and went out of your business is always going to be your accounting software. So you want to make sure that you've got the right financial metrics. And then the last one is scoping accuracy. As I mentioned earlier, we want to have a feedback loop on whether or not we're doing a good job of making assumptions about client work. Because if we're not, then we don't have a solid foundation to build agency operations on top of, and we're just going to struggle to make plans for the future because we just don't have a system for accurately scoping work. So those are kind of the four key areas that I want to make sure everyone understands. You got to have some level of visibility into these different places. So the next thing I'm going to do is just quickly break down a little bit more of the detail behind what those four things mean. So we're going to start with earning efficiency. I've already kind of explained the concept, right? The basic idea is it costs you money to earn revenue. This is your team, whether it's freelance or salaried. As you work towards a deliverable, there's a cost that's being incurred, kind of like gas in a car as it drives closer to its destination. And so the two ways to measure this are gross margin or average billable rate. So we'll first talk about gross margin. This is one of the financial metrics that you would be calculating. The simple formula for gross margin is going to be your AGI. You've got AGI, you've got costs. So this is delivery cost. Delivery cost divided by AGI. So that sounds really simple. Now let's dig into the nuances here. One of the big mistakes that I see people make when they're trying to figure out or project profitability on a project is they start talking about overhead and they start trying to bring overhead into the calculation of a single project. Even the idea of thinking about like net profit on a project, I think is a flawed idea. Unless your entire business starts and ends with every single project, like you're firing your accountant, you're closing down your office space, you're firing your legal team, you're literally shutting the whole business down. I don't know of anyone that runs their business that way. The idea of trying to get to net profit on a project it just doesn't make any sense. So what we want to instead focus on as a metric for earning efficiency and project level efficiency is gross margin. And the way we want to think about this is, what is the direct cost of earning our revenue relative to the agency gross income that was earned during this project? So let's break this down. Agency gross income is the idea of taking your total revenue and you're pulling out pass-through costs. So what is a pass-through cost? A pass-through cost is basically any money that is being collected, but that never belonged to you or isn't your responsibility to earn. So ad spend is a good example of this. Materials for the client, print budgets, right? Like that money is not yours, and the amount of time that you spend on the project does not impact that revenue. You don't need to earn it with your time. Another good example of this is money that's passing through you into external vendors that are doing work that is not core to your business. So if you use a white label development partner for your WordPress websites, like a Dude Agency or an Endasta, then that I would consider to be passed through, because they're now responsible for the earning efficiency of that revenue, not you. It doesn't really affect you. So what's left over after that is your AGI. This is your actual revenue when we think about all the benchmarking that we're talking about today. So the first thing is get to AGI, make sure you have an AGI number for every single project that you quote. And then you want to look at your delivery costs. And the delivery cost is simply, what is the time that was spent, the direct cost that was spent to earn this revenue? So this is where we're taking, if you have salaried employees, you're figuring out what their cost per hour is, and you're multiplying it by the amount of time that they spent on this project. If you're using freelancers, of course, that's very simple. And there's a nuance here where if a freelancer is being brought in because you just didn't have the capacity to do the work that you otherwise would have done internally, then you can include them here in your delivery cost. If a freelancer is being used because that's just not something that you would hire for, it's just something that is not really core to your business, then I would put them into pass-through revenue. But delivery cost is basically time multiplied by your cost per hour. So a simple example here is, let's just say we've got $500 in costs relative to a $5,000 project. This is where I should be better at quick math, but we have a 90% gross margin on this project. That's really good. So the target for gross margin on a per project basis is 50 to 70% or greater. So that's on a per project level. When we zoom that up to the agency level, we want to assume that we're going to lose a certain percentage of that. So we're looking generally at 40 to 60% plus at the agency level as a reasonable target. We want to assume we're going to lose about 10% of our gross margin due to gaps in utilization primarily, or shared production expenses. So this would be like stuff like your Figma license that you pay for every month that is not attributed to a single project, but you know it's there. And so you just want to bake that into your target for individual projects, so that you know, okay, we're going to lose, 4 or 5% of our gross margin to like all the software we have to pay for, our stock footage library, our Canva account, whatever it is that you're using. And then there's going to be gaps in utilization that are going to cost us a little bit of additional. And as long as we can net out, 10 or 15% below our target for projects, then that means we're headed in the right direction. So this is a lot. It just took me 6-7 minutes to explain gross margin. So that makes it not a great metric for tracking project profitability, especially on like a very short-term basis. So the thing that I prefer to do instead is use average billable rate as a directional way to measure this, so we can get a finger on the pulse much more often and with far less data. And the simple calculation for average billable rate is your AGI, which we've already talked about, divided by your billable hours. Or really, I'll simplify this and just say hours. So if we look at on a per project basis, let's say we had an AGI of $10,000 and we spent 200 hours on that project. Then we take 10,000, we divide it by 200, and we made $50 ABR on that project. And so this is a really, really, really simple way that we can start to understand and compare different projects to each other, different time periods to each other, different clients to each other, and start to get an understanding of like, okay, this has a higher average billable rate, this has a lower average billable rate. And as long as we understand our average cost per hour, so let's just say in this case, our average cost per hour is $17, then we can do some quick math, divide 17 by 50, and we know, okay, we're at about a 66% gross margin if we hit a $50 average billable rate. So we can just kind of set an average billable rate target and use that to get a finger on the pulse day to day, week to week, and then trust that when we get our accounting reports at the end of the month or the end of the quarter, we're going to be roughly in the right spot because we were paying attention to how efficiently we're earning revenue on a tighter basis. So this is the way that I recommend everybody kind of walk away from today and just start thinking about measuring how efficiently are we earning revenue on clients, on projects, and across short time horizons. Utilization is next. This is real simple. You have capacity. You have billable hours. Billable hours. And the formula is billable hours over capacity. Now, there's a ton of nuance to what is capacity and what is a billable hour. Those are two very, very nuanced conversations. I'll save you guys all a lot of time. I've got a spreadsheet in our profitability toolkit, which I'm just going to post here in the chat, that will do all of this math for you correctly. But when we think about capacity, we're thinking about what is the total amount of time that somebody has in a given time period that we're paying them for. So a full-time employee, usually that's 2,080 hours per year, 40 hours a week times 52 weeks. We're not stripping out holidays. We're not stripping out vacation. We're not stripping out the company foosball tournament. We're looking at gross capacity. The reason for this is it makes this so much easier to calculate every week because we don't have to be accounting for all of those little nuanced changes. And again, just like gross margin, we can set our target for utilization to account for the fact that those losses are going to be there. And we can model what that level of inefficiency due to holidays and sick time and paid time off is going to be ahead of time. So a simple example here is if I have somebody that has 2,080 hours of capacity in a given year and they work 1,200 billable hours, we do that math. That person was, drum roll please, 57% utilized. So again, the target for utilization, we're generally looking on like a weekly basis, all things being normal, somewhere between, for most people, 75 and 95% billable, depending on their role. This would be for pure producers. So we're talking copywriters, designers, developers, people who are really like flat out on projects. People who are in more senior positions, maybe they're creative directing, they're overseeing a delivery team, or they're project managing, their target's likely going to be a little bit lower on a week-to-week basis because we expect them to be doing a little bit more general work that's not attributed directly to a client. And then your net annual target for the entire agency is probably going to be right around 60 to 65%. So you should have a team composition and billable targets that allow you to get somewhere in that 60 to 65% range on an annual basis. So that's utilization. The last thing I want to talk about really quick is your financial metrics. So we've talked a little bit about this, but we've got your AGI is something that you want to be tracking. You want to make sure that you're also keeping track of your direct labor cost or your delivery costs. And then you also want to make sure you're keeping track of your overhead. So if we do these things, we have AGI minus your delivery costs is going to give you the output of these two numbers together. This is going to give you your delivery margin or your gross margin, like we talked about earlier. So on your P&L, as long as you can figure out what's our AGI, and your accountant right now is probably calling that gross profit, all the cogs that are getting pulled out, that's probably showing up as a gross profit line on your P&L. And as long as you can isolate what percentage of our payroll went to delivery, what percentage of our software expenses went to delivery, or you've got separate lines on your chart of accounts for delivery payroll, delivery software, et cetera, you should be able to get a sense of what your delivery margin is in your financials. And then you're just subtracting out your overhead, which should usually be somewhere between 20 and 30% of your AGI. your direct labor cost is usually going to be somewhere between 30 and 50%, right, of your AGI. And that will give you your net profit or your operating profit, which is the level of efficiency that your business has at rewarding you for all the risks you took on starting a business, which is a lot. So let's break down overhead, because I get this question a lot. 4 to 6% of your AGI generally is going to facilities. 8 to maybe 14% is going to admin on the high end, and 8 to maybe 14% going to sales and marketing. So your total overhead is somewhere between 20 and 30%. Some of this is going to depend on your operating model. Do you have an office? Is your team fully remote? Are you doing one of these white label outsource models with a small core team, or are you doing everything in-house? Like, these dynamics impact what this might look like for you. Like, your facilities might be 1% because the whole team's remote and you send them a coffee mug once a year, and you really don't have any facilities expenses. Or maybe you've invested in, a really, really nice office space because that's a part of how you position yourself. I'm not going to comment on what I think the right strategy is, but just keep in mind that you want to try and make sure that your overhead remains somewhere between 20 and 30% of your AGI. And then if you want to make the choice to invest additional money into sales and marketing to grow the business, that's okay. But understand that that's a choice that you're making, to borrow from your bottom line today to invest in, hopefully a larger bottom line and more growth into the future. So that breaks down our financials. So that's covered now our kind of 3 of the core metrics. We've talked about earning efficiency. We've talked about utilization. We've talked about financial metrics. The last one is scoping accuracy. And that's really simple. It's just having the ability to, at the end of a project, ask the question, did we spend as much time on this as we thought? So sorry, I'm getting mixed up. I've got a new slide deck here, and it's the first time that I've worked with this. But the simple idea is, you've got your estimate, you've got your time tracking tool. You just want to make sure that you've got somewhere where you can reconcile, okay, here's the project, here's the client, here's how much time we estimated, and here's the structure that it was in, and that you can get your time tracking data into a format that matches that exactly, so that when you sit down to have a conversation with your team in a retroactive and say, hey, what happened on this project and why, you don't spend the whole retrospective trying to agree on what happened, and you can instead spend it trying to talk about why what happened and come to a mutual understanding of how to move forward. So that essentially covers this first part of the flywheel. Is make sure you've got a feedback loop with your estimates, make sure you're measuring your core metrics. We've talked about some targets. I'm curious, any questions so far based on what we've talked about? How are we doing for time?
Time is up to you. I just have a hard stop in 30, but yeah, let's dive into any questions you have. And if you guys can chime in, I'm going to read through some of the points that we're supposed to hit on, just to make sure that we did cover what we promised to cover. And those who join late, you may have some questions about the beginning stuff, but we are going to share the deck and the notes and all that good stuff for you guys that came in late. We definitely hit on how to measure agency performance, at least in part, the profitability and how to measure margins and what margins mean to the agency. We dove in deep there. Let's do a run through one more time of the KPIs that we should be monitoring that you believe are probably the overlooked, or at least the not obvious.
Yeah, I think really, like, if I had to pick just 2, if you're hitting your utilization and earning efficiency target, then this should take care of itself. The financials should take care of themselves, really. Because if you think about it, like, if you know that your average cost per hour is X, and so you set your average billable rate target at a 70% margin, and then you're consistently hitting that, then it would make sense that in your financials, you're going to be materially close to that margin. And then if you are just making sure that you're not overspending dramatically, then you should net out at a healthy net profit. By the way, the question I get asked a lot is, like, how much net profit should my agency produce? Well, part of that is it should be your choice to some extent. Like, you should get to choose how much of your bottom line you want to reinvest, but the business should be designed to return at least 25% of your AGI to you as profit as a founder at the end of the year. So if you're not If your business isn't designed to do that, then I would argue that you have a flaw in your business model. Either you don't have enough gross margin on your projects, and so there's a pricing, packaging, or efficiency thing that needs to get figured out there. You're overspending on overhead, or you're having a systemic challenge with utilization. But there's something holding you back from running a profitable business that's more systemic. If when you run a model, it doesn't give you the possibility of netting out at least 25% of AGI at the end of the year. And then again, like if you want to borrow from that to invest additional money into sales and marketing, that's your choice, but it should be a choice, not up to chance.
Oh, I love it. And then we did have a point here that you may have touched on briefly, but I may have missed. But how do I set up my operations tooling to make reporting these easy? I know you went into that, but maybe more on the actual tools and what you recommend and what you see agencies using to do that. And then let's round it out with go here, do this first, second, third steps to get this process in the works. What should they do first, second, third? But first, the tooling.
Yeah. So the biggest idea on tooling is just kind of thinking through, really nailing down this first. What is our structure for how we make assumptions about client work, right? What is our hierarchy for that? What are the objects? Do we have a client, and then we have a project, and then within a project, maybe we have phases or we have milestones, and then within those milestones, do we have tasks? Do we have roles? Do we have services? Like, really think through that and come up with something that you feel is going to help you get the answers that you need when something goes wrong. And one of the useful ways to think through what is the appropriate structure for you is like, if shit hit the fan on a project, what are the questions? Just start writing them down. What's the first, second, third, fourth question that I'd be asking to figure out why? And then set up your data so it's able to answer those questions for you. Once you have that data schema, then it's a question of just going into your time tracking tool, going into your project management tool, and making sure that the data that those are producing feed back up into that core schema. Because otherwise, what you end up with is data that's in a format that needs to be changed or adjusted in order to answer those questions that we've just sat down and understood that this is how I need to investigate and get to the bottom of why there's a gap between my assumptions and reality. And if there's all that additional friction, it's just not going to happen. You can't automate the reporting. You can't streamline that. It's harder to delegate to somebody. And I haven't met an agency owner that has 3 hours in an afternoon every week to sit down and sit in a spreadsheet to try and answer a question like, was this project as profitable as we thought it was going to be, or did we spend as much time as we thought we were going to on it? So that's really like the baseline thing. And if you want to go deeper on that, then I'd recommend checking out the toolkit. We've got some videos in there that go into much more depth on how to think through that exercise. But that's really the simple idea is if you are clear on what the fundamental schema is for your agency, then you can go and check all your tools to make sure that they're able to produce data that's lined up. And the simple way that we do this with clients is what we call an object map. So we've got the estimate. The estimate has objects. We have a client, we have a project, we have a milestone, we have a task. And then I pull up harvest. It's like, okay, what are all the objects in harvest? Okay, we have projects, cool. That maps to projects on the estimate. We've got phases, cool. That maps to milestones on the estimate. We have tasks in harvest, cool. That's going to map to the tasks on the estimate. And you're literally just drawing a line, like what item inside of this project or inside of this tool maps back to the estimate. And you're just creating a diagram essentially so that everybody's clear on, if I want to know how many of X was spent on this project, I look at this thing in the project management tool, I look at this thing in the time tracking tool. And then once that's clarified, then it's just a question of making sure that you hold the team accountable to setting things up in that way. Now, of course, this is part of the reason why we do things a little bit differently when we work with clients on reporting. I understand that compliance at the tool level is difficult to manage, but if you do this and then your team is 90% good at keeping up with it, it just makes it a lot less painful to do reporting. So that's the simple answer to how do we make operations tooling easy and fast, is it's like, just start with the questions that you want to answer in mind and then look at all of your tooling through that lens.
Oh, good answers, man. Always a pleasure, Marcel. This is always so detailed and thorough.
It's deep.
Very, very much appreciative. Everybody.
One last thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
I want to do. I'm just checking out. There's no questions in the chat. So there's one last thing I want to plug here. which is, I think, relevant because it's January 11th as we're recording this. This is the start of the year. This is a tool that we have inside of our agency profitability toolkit. We call it our agency model builder and scenario simulator. So essentially what this allows you to do is go in and for the given year, put in all the people that work for you, how much they're getting paid, how many hours a week they work, what their billable target is, how much time off they get. And a lot of the things that I've talked to you guys about, utilization targets, AGI capacity, it'll calculate all of that for you. So you can start to model like, okay, if you use a rate card, what is that? If I just have an average billable rate target, let's call it 175, I can just put that in. There's a video that walks you through how to use this. Then you can go in and do some salary allocations. So you can say like, okay, Marie is the founder, but she spends half of her time doing billable stuff, the other half selling and doing admin. You know, these people are mostly just producers. Then you can go in and set your budgets. Okay, I want to spend 45% on delivery. I want to spend 10% on sales and marketing, 10% on admin, which nets me out at 31%. You can see how much of your budget is already allocated to payroll. So how much is left over for other things that you might be spending that money on. And then you kind of get your benchmarks all modeled out for you here. So what is your AGI capacity in the given year? So with that team, I should be able to do this much revenue. How much gross profit should I expect to make? What kind of net profit should I expect to make? And what kind of budgets should I be setting for each area of my business? It also gives you a sense of your weekly utilization target, your net utilization target. Clearly, I have a formula here to update in this before I send it out to all of you, but this is the kind of tooling that's in the toolkit. It's my belief that everybody should be able to do this stuff without paying me or anybody else a penny. So if you want to dig deeper into this, check out the toolkit. There's videos and stuff in there to help you get started. And with that, I think I've got to jump because I got a podcast interview to get on, but I hope that that was helpful. Mic drop. Marcel
yes, no, always. I see Mike McDermott, buddy. Haven't seen you in a while. Welcome back. Thanks, Amy, for that comment. Definitely. Hopefully this was insightful. I think everybody agree it was, always is. Marcel, welcome back anytime. See everybody in the next new Revenue Wednesdays. And if you haven't onboarded into Partner Hub, that's our plug, please book some time with Melissa and I to get onboarded into Partner Hub. Thanks, everybody. Take care. Thanks, Marcel.
Cheers, everyone.